Right, good morning. I'm Lucy Stevenson, Deputy Leader at Rutland County Council, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to our first virtual climate summit, the Climate Conversation. We come together at a watershed moment in our time, a global pandemic, and a sense of urgency with regard to the impact that human activity is having on the fundamental sustainability of our planet. But I introduce with hope. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Mike Berners-Lee, a renowned professor at Lancaster University and expert in developing tools for practical thinking about our future. I quote him when I say, "We have the chance to live better than ever." In January 2021, Rutland County Council declared a climate crisis. By doing so, we acknowledged the need to reduce our carbon footprint with the ultimate goal of being carbon net zero. Our current emissions are a symptom of a fundamental truth. As a species, we overconsume, waste too much, and do not consistently apply good ethical standards to our supply chains. So what to do, how to tackle? Well, today the overarching ambition is to establish a network of community-based action groups. Each and every one of us has a part to play, both collectively and individually. This, the first part of our summit, offers something of a whistle-stop tour covering a wide range of topics, all pertinent to the climate change agenda. Oh, and I do apologise, everybody. Apparently, I can't actually change my slides, but we'll crack on regardless. Oh, there we go. There is the running order. So this slide is indicative of the breadth and depth of the task in hand. Every aspect of life requires careful consideration and meticulous strategic planning if we are to live sustainably now and long into the future. We start with a global perspective, and one I hope will resonate with all of us. Farming is one of the oldest jobs in the world, and certainly one that can be described as essential. Food, a must for us all. Whilst the steep, rugged hill farms of New Zealand may seem a million miles away from sunny Rutland, the challenge of truly sustainable farming in the current climate of conflicting rhetoric regarding making environmentally friendly food choices is a debate with similarities in argument the developed world over. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Lincoln Grant, who is live in New Zealand. I will let him introduce himself. Over to you, Lincoln.
Thank you, Lucy. I hope you can all understand Kiwi. I've been told it's a lot like Australian, but we don't say mate in every sentence. I want to start by telling you a fact that I learned quite by chance that shocked me. I met a guy from the local Air Force base. He was in charge of fuel. I meant to say that I've actually called the theme of my talk today the jet, airliner and the farm. But I wanted to start by telling you this wee story. Sometimes the weather, because of weather, international flight is diverted from Auckland and the planes end up at the Air Force base. And he said to me, "We had an A380 drop in last week. Guess how much fuel I put in it?" The answer was 200,000 litres. Wow. How much do those things hold? 320,000 litres, as much as 5,000 family cars. I was quite stunned. So going back to the farm, we've got 620 hectares of hill country. We farm sheep and cattle, we feed grass and live outside 12 months of the year, unlike in the UK where our animals are often housed over winter for a period in barns. The property includes over 100 hectares of native bush, none of which incidentally is accounted for or included in calculations that currently assess New Zealand's farming emission profile. There's very little cultivation and machinery use is limited to mainly for some maintenance tasks. Quite honestly, not a lot has changed over the years, but it's a wonderful ecosystem producing food for the world in a very sustainable way and one that we're tremendously proud of. It is one major threat. Other than Bill Gates and other highly influential people trying to convince the world that farming is bad for the environment And if we are to eat meat, we should be eating synthetic meat, which they will make money out of. The major threat we currently face is the ETS, or the New Zealand Emissions Trading Scheme. The NZ ETS, a scheme designed to show that we are meeting our obligations under the Paris Agreement for climate change, is having some bizarre and worrying consequences for our country. It's a model in which emitters can offset their pollution by buying carbon credits, which in New Zealand are used by carbon investors to buy up our beautiful pastoral farm, food-producing pastoral land, and plant them in exotic pine trees that will never be tended or used for timber products. These rapidly growing exotic trees have a limited lifetime, after which they will rot, fall down, and release most of the carbon that was theoretically stored. There'll be a huge fire risk, harbour pests, and suck valuable water out of our catchments. Now, carbon farming, as it's known, which is really an oxymoron in my opinion, is at the moment nearly twice as profitable as pastoral farming. It is set to ruin our rural communities and small towns that depend on farming for employment and their livelihood. Virtually every hill farm sold now has been bought by those investors, as traditional farming just simply can't compete with the prices paid for carbon investors by carbon investors. This is an environmental and economic disaster in the making, a political solution that won't make one iota of difference to climate change, just ticking a box, the offsetting box. I come back to the jet airliner as an example, because our national airline, Air New Zealand, are one of the companies involved in these carbon farms, embracing the offsetting model and making claims that they're one of the greenest airlines in the world, using offsetting as a greenwashing marketing tool to offer great guilt-free travel to customers, when in reality they're burning millions of litres of jet fuel, ruining the environment, and now ruining someone's rural community with miles of pine trees that nobody wants. Offsetting in this case is offloading aviation waste into our rural landscapes, a classic case of two wrongs don't make a right. A couple of other interesting facts about the aviation industry that you may be interested in. Airlines, by international treaty, don't pay any fuel taxes. International air travel is not included in the Paris Agreement on climate change. Aircraft have far greater climate effects than simply the CO2 produced due to a process known as radiative forcing, which I won't go into in detail, but research suggests that we need to multiply carbon emissions from air travel by 2.7 to get the true contribution to global warming. New Zealand is a farm. We can't plant our way out of our emissions. We simply don't have enough land. And that will be exactly the same in the UK. The trees are good, but you simply don't have enough land to plant to make a difference to climate change. We need to reduce our emissions at source. So we have to ask the question, how do we, why are we in this mess, and what are we going to do to fix things? Well, the answer is the world is powered by burning fossil fuel. Something like 84% of the world's energy coming from fossil fuel, and a massive amount of that, something like 30% coming from coal. We need to stop burning stored carbon for energy and make a quantum shift to renewable energy. The sad thing is the technology is already there, particularly in the solar, but the uptake is poor. I use the example of the 1,200 hectare farm down the road sold to carbon investors, effectively thrown away forever. The carbon investors will be paid about $25 million in credits over the next 20 years. That is enough to buy 90,000 280 watt solar PV panels. Let's power up with the sun and stop burning coal. It's that simple. Incentivize installation and regulate new builds. We see huge housing subdivisions around our country, and you'll see the same thing without a solar panel in sight. These homes don't need to be off-grid with batteries. A simple 3 kV solar system that would feed settlers' energy back into the grid would only cost the equivalent of about £4,000 and should be part of a requirement for a new build on houses. coal as a source of energy generation needs to be gone. Electricity generation needs to be gone, and we could easily achieve this. Even in the UK, which is not exactly sunshine capital of the world, solar generation would be very effective. Unfortunately, it's not favoured by governments that own big stakes in lines companies which control the sale and supply of electricity. In China, where we got some cities, that are changing their public transport to electric vehicles, but have huge power generation, coal-generated power plants outside the city. This may improve the quality of the air in the city, but it's doing nothing to fight global warming. Until we have renewable energy powering these EVs, they are virtue signalling and not solving the problem. I want to quickly just touch on the metrics used to measure emissions and how they've affected our attitudes and beliefs about the effect of farm animals on climate change. The current metric used by the European Commission, the GWP 100, doesn't take into consideration that biological gases from animals like methane don't accumulate in the atmosphere. They break down after about 10 to 12 years. Unlike the gas that comes out the back of the jet airliner, that will be around and affect the environment for the next 1,000 years. Independent climate scientists have expressed concern that the GWP 100 approach, which was developed in the 90s, quite dramatically overstates the effect of stable herds of ruminants on global warming. There has been a new metric developed by scientists called GWP star that more accurately assesses the global warming effect of animals. And there's a major push to adopt this from researchers at Oxford University as one of them. Carbon emitted from animals is recycled carbon. It came from the atmosphere as CO2, was captured by plants, eaten by animals, then belched back into the atmosphere where it becomes CO2 again. So long as farmers are not increasing herd sizes, there is no further impact on global warming. Contrary to what the media and other influential people have told you, largely due to data produced by the GWP 100, but mud sticks. As a consequence, I've met many people in recent years, particularly young people, who are following vegan and vegetarian diets because of their concerns about the effect of farm animals on global warming. Many of these people have circumnavigated the globe several times pre-COVID, indulging in cheap air travel for their entertainment. Meat from our pastoral farms is the original superfood, rich in nutrients. Eat it if you like it. My advice is let Bill Gates make your computer and let farmers make your food. Thank you for your time today, and sorry for spoiling your overseas holiday with my stories about air travel. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Lincoln. And I think it is very useful to be talking about massive emissions from aeroplanes. I'm now going to move on swiftly. I'm hoping that Alistair Leake from the Allerton Project will be our next speaker and has managed to log on.
Well, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can, and I shall hand over and mute myself, which will be a dear relief to everyone.
That's great, thank you. So if you could move to my first slide also, that would be great. Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be speaking to you today, and of course I'm much more local than our previous speaker. I'm right here on the ground on the Leicestershire-Rutland border, and in front of you, you should have a picture of what I think is our greatest opportunity to lock up carbon, and that is in our soil. So it might surprise you that we have 3 times more carbon in our soils than we have in the atmosphere, and we have a great opportunity to put some more there if we can. Now, here at the Allerton Project, for the last 30 years, we've been experimenting as to how we can combine productive productive agriculture with improving the environmental performance of our farming system. That includes biodiversity, which is something we specialised in. We've doubled our songbirds here on the farm by taking measures to improve their status. We're now looking at how we can improve the way that we farm, reducing our carbon output and sequestering as much carbon as we can. So building carbon in the soil simply means growing as many plants as we can that we can then put that carbon back into the soil. Those crop residues, planting crops which will ultimately add to that pool of carbon, and reducing the amount of tillage that we use to grow our crops. So when we plough the soil, we get a huge amount of carbon emitted. The air that we introduce to the soil layer allows all the bugs and beasties in there to start to breathe, and they release that carbon dioxide. So we've moved over to a system of what we call zero till, where we don't plough at all, but simply slot the seed directly into the soil. This is fantastic news for earthworms. You know, they really don't like being ploughed. And we've seen our earthworm numbers go from 200 per cubic metre to 700 per cubic metre. Unfortunately, because we're a scientific organisation, it does mean we've been measuring some of the impacts of that increase in earthworm numbers. And what we see is that actually they, as living organisms, increase the amount of carbon dioxide which is being emitted from the soil. So you might think that's a bad thing, but actually over a period of 10 years, we've discovered that increasing earthworms does increase carbon emissions, but it massively improves soil health. And indeed, we actually, by adopting the system that we have, increase the amount of carbon that we're locking up in the soil. So it's a really good news story, because more earthworms mean better soil health, but also we're still building the soil carbon at the same time. So if I can have the next slide, please. Of course, within the county, we have a great deal of livestock, and it might be a surprise to some people to know that up until recently, it was not possible for farmers to grow trees and graze sheep at the same time because you lost your subsidy payment. But now, mercifully, that has changed, and this is a massive opportunity for us. Lincoln mentioned that in the UK, many of our livestock spend the wintertime in sheds, and sheds are a big carbon footprint because they're made out of concrete and steel, which is a massive carbon footprint. But if we can outwinter our sheep in the pasture because they're sheltered by the trees, which are locking up carbon at the same time, and incidentally in the summertime, those trees provide shade to the sheep from the heat of the sunshine. That is a great opportunity. And Lincoln forgot to mention what I consider to be the most useful output of sheep, and that is their wool. At the moment, for insulation, we are using rock wool, which is made from fossil fuel and sand, when in fact we could be growing our own here in the county on the backs of our sheep flock and using that in our buildings, which brings us beautifully on to the next slide, please. And this is our visitor centre built in 2012. The building is insulated using 400 straw bales that we made on the field next door. That was after we sold the wheat grain to Kellogg's to make Special K. That was all eaten long ago, but my straw is now insulating the building. It gives us double the insulation capacity of man-made insulation, but it used 8 times less energy to create. And this insulation is locking carbon up where it will stay until that building is destroyed. The building is heated with biomass, which is grown on our own farm. The electricity comes from the solar panels on the roof. All the rainwater which falls on that roof goes into a huge tank and is recycled to flush the toilets. At the moment, all our households are supplied with water, which is pumped by electricity into the house when we have the opportunity to actually catch our own water and use it. And finally, the car park and the fencing around the car park is made out of recycled silage wrap, which is taking a waste product and locking up carbon and using it for something functional. So finally, onto my very last slide. This is our new office building, which is made out of 100% wood, except for the metal screws which hold it together. These are the sort of buildings that we should be looking at, where we cut down trees and replant them and lock the carbon up in our buildings. And all of this is in the capacity of farmers to deliver, because all the products that I've talked about here, be it the straw or the wood, are grown on farms. And so rather than just focus on completely producing food, in the future, we need to be producing these other products and hopefully using them locally in the county. So thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Alistair, and it's really nice to see such a holistic approach and actually appreciating the value of soil to a really, really good level, which is great. So thank you so very much. And I know that you are coming to our second session, so I'm sure people joining those will enjoy asking you a few more questions and for some guidance on how we could perhaps borrow some of those ideas for our gardens. Now, everybody, we are moving on, and this is a bit of a fingers crossed moment. Do feel to join in virtually. We are hoping to go live on location to Claire and Alex from Root and Branch Out. I'm sure many of you have seen lots of things happening across Rutland with community growing, whether it's in schools, out in allotments, out in the community. I know I've certainly learned how to make flower pots out of newspapers, which is probably the best use for newspapers. And I'm just looking to see if I can see them on the panel. Oh, I've just had a message. Sorry, not seeing them in the list. Kate, could I be a pain and ask you to present next? Is that all right? Brilliant. And I will just get somebody to stop sharing my screen because I know that you have a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you ever so much for your flexibility.
That's fine. Right, just give me 1 second. Okay, is that sharing okay? That's it. Can you hear me? Great, okay, thank you very much. So hi, I'm Kate Heisman, and I set up the Sustainable Land Trust here in Rutland, and like Alistair, we are based on the border of Leicestershire, of Melton and Rutland, and we do a lot of work in Rutland. And we're based at Borough Court, and that is a 1,200-acre farming estate. You may know it, it's near the Borough on the Hill. We've been working with the landowners there for 7 or 8 years now, and there are 2 farms. And we're now developing the 2 farms. One is a research farm to look at climate and nature and environmental impact, and the other farm more as a health and well-being farm, how people can benefit from nature by using nature in different ways. But we also work out in the community as well, and we've done several projects over the last few years in some of the Rutland communities. And you may remember, or may not remember, just before lockdown, or slightly before lockdown, we did a consultation in the VAR rooms looking at climate change for Rutland. And so Lucy and the council are now picking up that baton and taking that forward. So what I wanted to talk about today is some of the things, really sort of some of the things that we can do in Rutland. And I wanted to introduce to you a small project that we're running for Rutland communities over the summer called Climate and Nature Positive Communities. And that's really to encourage us all to work together in the vein that Lucy mentioned, to try and help each other. So the concept of net zero communities, I think, will become a much more important concept, because in rural Rutland, we don't experience some of the big flooding issues that some of the cities and towns do in other areas. But certainly if you're living in a village like I do in Whistendine, You know, the mantra is you have to drive a 4x4 to get out of the village sometimes, or you have to drive quite a long way to get out. Flooding is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. But also the climate crisis is becoming much more of a lived experience for many UK rural communities. And also, as Alistair quite rightly said, it's about the landscapes that surround those communities and also the species that rely upon those communities. And also from a land use and land management decision-making processes, how are people using their land that might impact or take the opportunity to adapt to or mitigate against climate change. So I think we've all been really lucky. I started working in the sector of climate change, energy and nature 30 years ago. And every few years or so, I would listen to the news as the new politicians came into government or whatever, say, okay, we're going to create new policies on this, 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 and this. And the solutions would always be the same and never, ever implemented. And I used to get really fed up with the rhetoric. During the 2007 years of the last but one economic crisis, the word I noted that from October 2007 to 2011, the word environment was not mentioned on Radio 4 at all. Okay, so I listened to Radio 4 a lot, but it really was an indication that money rather than our environment was the most important thing. And I'd expected us as a country to sleepwalk our way towards 2050, which is when we're now looking at a zero. But what has been amazing is that during the pandemic, and the fact that only a year ago today, we were able to look out of our windows and see those amazing blue skies and listen to the birds in absolute abundance. That gave me some hope. And since then, councils and communities and politicians and business people have been rushing forward too quickly for me to keep up with. But there are so many initiatives and so much force now behind the idea that I think even in some of our sleepy rural villages, we will have to address the impacts of climate change, and we will have to think about the nature deficit, and we will all have to think about the way that our lives are carried out. So a transition to a more greener economy needs to be underpinned by a low carbon and nature positive action so that we can make decisions in our communities that will reshape our local areas, not only to address those issues, but also to be cognizant of the people who live there and think about what our children's lives are going to be like. Startling fact, a baby child born today in 2021 is likely to see the year 2121. It's incredible that our children are likely to live to the age of 100. And so we need to step up and help those children. So some research that was carried out by the Institute of Policy Research did some work a couple of years or so ago, looking at how communities respond and thinking about what are the biggest actions that communities make. And here is an illustration of the different forms of community action. And as I'm sure that you're aware, you know, lots of communities around the UK for many, many years have been introducing projects and different actions to address climate change. And you may have heard of the concept of transition communities, which started in the 90s to move villages and towns away from oil-based economies. So some of these things are going to be talked about today. And you can see there's quite a lot of information there and quite a lot of opportunity. But this research also identified that in terms of all of those possibilities, communities and parishes actually favoured some of the more community-focused actions, such as growing food, tree planting, walking, cycling, and transport, because these are the easier options that people as individuals can make themselves. So you'll hear from Alex and Claire shortly about the projects that they're doing around growing and so on. And because those actions tend to be easier for people to engage with. But you look at the actions that haven't actually been taken up so much by these community groups. Recycling, energy efficiency, flood defence, energy generation are the ones I'm going to highlight in this graph, because all of those things require communities to work together with our infrastructure partners. So whether that be our energy suppliers, whether that be our water boards or water suppliers, or whether that be our councils and so on. And so that is what has stifled a lot of the good work that we have tried to do in the past. And I think this is where, along with all of the community projects that we're going to talk about and look at, that we as a county also need to be considering as well. But on top of that, we need to be extremely aware, and Alistair mentioned it, and so did Lincoln earlier, about the impact on our wildlife. Nature provides us with so many free services that actually in themselves can help achieve the targets that we might want to achieve for recycling and for flood defence and for energy generation. And as part of all of that, I think there's a new education that can be identified within Rutland, and that is really to build the capacity of our parish councils and our community groups and our schools and our individuals to help them to tackle these, and also to understand, what they're doing and the impacts of what they're doing and how they can share and benefit from those. So in the talks that you'll hear today, I come up a little bit earlier in the agenda, but we're launching a project called Climate and Nature Positive Communities, a short project over the summer that will provide a programme of learning and action with demonstrations for parish councils and schools and community groups. It's not limited to that. If you own a garden and you're interested in learning about what you can do by taking some of these bigger ideas, then you're welcome to join as well. So what we want to do is to build the capacity of organisations within the county so that they themselves within their areas can identify the impacts of climate change and nature deficit, and also think about the opportunities that are available to them. Working with the council and with neighbourhood plan groups and local parishes and so on, it's about setting goals and targets and thinking about where you want to be and how you're going to get there. And that leads then into thinking about what your plans might be and how you might carry out those actions. Whether you need funding, whether you need volunteers, whether you need resources, is identifying those early so that they can be planned in and shared with everybody. And then the final link in the chain then is to record what you have done and review the actions that you've taken and share those and then repeat them so that we're all working towards a more climate and nature positive community. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at, and we will learn from today's sessions about some of the other priorities, is to work with you to help you to map your climate impacts and your nature deficit in your area. So this would work well at a parish scale, for example, or work well if you're a community group with allotment or, sort of at any scale. You can then get involved in learning about how nature supports your communities. What are the things in your landscapes? What are the landscapes doing to help? And also how you can implement what are called nature-based solutions. But we're also going to think hard about the communities that you will live with. What are their needs and what are their aspirations for the future? And what sort of things can't we possibly leave behind? We can't result in nature and climate positive communities without also sharing that benefit to help people's health and well-being, economy, and to address inequality issues. Then it's about talking to people in your areas. How are the best ways to get people involved? How are the best ways to actually engage with people so that some of those actions then take place successfully? It's not about a top-down approach anymore. Top-down doesn't work. And then to think about some of the place-based solutions using nature, but also making the most of partnerships that the council are going to be developing and help the communities to build resilience. So that's coming, and we will be working with Lucy and the team to put together a programme where we can roll this out. But I would invite you to, add your name to the list if you're interested in joining this programme. And I will finish with some very wise words that I tend to live by and that the trust was set up by, is that it seems to me that the natural world is the greatest source of excitement, the greatest source of visual beauty, the greatest source of intellectual interest. It is the greatest source of so much in life that makes life worth living. And that is our great David Attenborough, who has influenced my life, and the mantra is how we set up the trust from that. So I would like to say thank you very much for listening, and I hope to talk to you all in the next session. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Kate. And I know that when we've spoken, the opportunities to do brilliant projects that really suit each individual community is absolutely fantastic. Now, I'm very pleased to welcome Alex, who is on location. We're being very exotic today, New Zealand location, to Root and Branch, our community growing group, who are at their allotment, and I will hand straight over and they can tell us all about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for our slight technical delay, but welcome to Growers Row. I am behind the camera because I'm going to walk you in through our garden gate, which is here. Hopefully you can see this. And this is Growers Row. So this is a 1.5 acre field site that we took over just 8 weeks ago. It's huge compared to what we've had before. So we're slowly developing the site. We've got our shed, and we've got some keyhole beds, and we've got a few raised beds here, and a lot of topsoil that unfortunately we've had to import because this is a ridge and furrow field that hasn't been used as a productive growing space for many, many years. It's had a few sheep on it, but that's about it. So we've got lots of plans for this, and all our projects, we think about our impact on the planet. So our keyhole beds over here, they have a compost area in the middle, which we put the compost in, and that reduces the amount of water we need to water those areas in because it makes it a sustainable growing space. So they're called keyhole because they look like a keyhole from the top. We've also managed to get hold of lots of logs to edge lots of our beds, and that's what we do with our keyhole beds here. We also are planning, although we haven't started yet, to harvest as much water off any structures we've got on site. So there's quite a small shed at the moment with Claire stood in front of it, who's going to talk to you in a moment, which will have guttering on and water butts. We're also going to have a shelter space for our volunteers to sit in, which we haven't built yet. That's still work in progress. We've got the materials, it's not built yet. And we've got a polytunnel that's work in progress going up. Yes, it's covered in plastic, but it was the best we could do to get a protected growing area. We did get offered a few greenhouses, but trying to get them onto site was proving more tricky than us actually getting a polytunnel. So we're going to try and work out a system for harvesting water off the polytunnel. And if you're interested in harvesting water, Oakham allotments at Kilburn Road are the most amazing place for harvesting water. They are fantastic. So if you speak to them, they'll show you round, and they've got just a fantastic way of water harvesting. So they use very, very little mains water, if none at all, actually, to harvest their allotments. So I'm going to pass over to Claire, who's going to talk about all our other projects that we do that think about how we impact on the planet. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm hoping that you can see me now. Alex, maybe you could turn your camera off. Can you turn your camera off? Yeah, I'm hoping everyone can see me now. Good morning and thanks for having us here. What a beautiful day. I'm glad we haven't got the wind and the rain from a couple of days ago and yesterday. So I'm going to tell you quickly about the other projects, some of the other projects that we do with a sustainability lens on everything that we do. So as well as the garden here, we run a forest school for a significant amount of children in our county through schools and in woodlands in Rutland. So the aim is to engage children in nature play and to make them as happy and comfortable in their environment so that they will look after it in the future and they will become carers and lovers of the natural environment. And we're working with many schools in Rutland at the moment and just keep on getting asked to do more and more of that. That's happened, it's changed because of COVID last year, and so we took it some time out, and then we're going back into our woodlands as soon as we can when children can use local transport or walk in groups through the town. Also, we have a community fridge that we set up during lockdown, and the first one was in Uppingham and the second one is now in Oakham. So we're using all the supermarket surplus. We have a team of volunteers who go and collect the food and then stack the fridges, and then we're open at the moment 3 times a week in Oakham and Uppingham, so people can come and get free food, and so all of that surplus food won't go to waste. If there is any waste at the end of the day, it goes to the farm park to feed their animals. Other things, we are very involved with local voluntary sector networks, and so opportunities for collaboration and strengthening local capacity happen really often, and so our place in the voluntary sector is really valued, to try and sort of work collaboratively and make sure as many people as we can work together with the same kind of vision. Also, we try really hard as an organisation to think about our impact whenever we buy anything. So we try and buy local, we try and avoid Amazon, we try and share cars if we can, although that has been more difficult in the last year, but that is our intention. We have a very keen volunteer who cycles everywhere to help us and then cycles home after a day's work, so he's great. So I think that's about it. We have quite a comprehensive website if you wanted to look up what we do, and we post on Facebook really often, so you can see what we're up to, and we would just love more and more people to be involved with community projects that we're in, because we know that they're good for people and planet. So if you would like to get in touch, then please do. I think that's about it. Thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you so much, Alex. Just to let people know, on this webinar, there will be a comprehensive list of all the contact details, etc. Because, as I say, I'm hoping at the end of this session, people will be reaching out in their communities to get things off the ground. And I hope what is reassuring is that there are a lot of organisations really close to hand that can help with that. Now I will move on to the next speaker, who is Chris French from the Welland Rivers Trust. I just need to share my screen again, and we will be, this is another cross-finger moment. There we go. Hopefully we can go from the beginning. No, it is not helping me with that. Thank you for your patience, everybody. This is why I'm not employed by the IT department. Oh, now we're on the right slide. Oh, it is on. I'm being told it is on. Oh, this is very good. And I will hand over to you, Chris. I do apologise for my IT competence.
That's all right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, everybody in RCC for putting this together, and congratulations for declaring a climate crisis. I think it's a very positive step forward for the county, and I look forward to working with everybody in Rutland on addressing some of these issues that are affecting the water environment. To get started, the Welland Rivers Trust is a local environmental charity we set up in 2010 with the aim of improving the water quality of the Welland catchment across the 610 square miles that it spans from its source in North Northamptonshire out to where it falls into the wash of Fosdyke. So we're part of the National Rivers Trust movement, which now comprises 36 individual trusts across Great Britain and the island of Ireland. It's really a rapidly growing movement, acknowledging the fact that the water environment is key to the health of the wider landscape and also the health and well-being of the communities that live alongside it. So we work with a wide variety of partners across the public, private and charitable sectors, and we coordinate something called the Welland Valley Partnership. Now this is a stakeholder-led approach to delivering strategic action where it's needed to improve the condition of Rutland's watercourses under something called the Water Framework Directive. And the map that you can see at the moment shows the ecological status of the rivers that run through Rutland, and we'll get onto that in a second. I'd also like to add that we're hosted and supported by a fantastic team at the Allerton Project, and it's great to see Alice DeLeek on this call as well. I do encourage all of you to go up and have a look at what they're doing at Allerton when they run open days. I'm not sure how Open Farm Sunday will work this year with the current restrictions, but it's a fantastic local resource that we can all make something from. So Rutland is very much the county of the Welland catchment. Almost all of the land in Rutland drains into the River Welland at some point, with the exception of a few headwater tributaries of the River Eye in the northwest of the county around Langland, Whistendine. And historically, water's played a huge role in defining the character of Rutland's landscapes and communities. When it comes to thinking about how climate change will affect them, rivers can actually be the key to restoring nature, building resilience to climate change, and improving local people's health and well-being. And sadly, as you can see from the map on your screen at the moment, we're quite a way away from that, and the picture of the current state of the watercourses in Rutland is not good. So this map shows the 200 kilometres roughly of watercourses in the county that are monitored under the Water Framework Directive. There are smaller watercourses as well that aren't monitored, but it's quite a crisscrossing network of water that we've got in the county. And the Water Framework Directive is a piece of EU law that's been maintained following Brexit to assess the ecological and chemical quality of those watercourses. And they're assessed against a list of criteria, including the populations of wildlife that are supported in there, the chemical quality, and how physically modified those environments have been. And sadly, Rutland falls well short of the target to have all rivers and streams in good ecological status by 2027, and it's well below the England average. We don't actually have a single watercourse in Rutland that is rated as having good ecological status. The England average is 15%, and 25% of the watercourses in Rutland are actually rated as being in bad ecological status. And that's compared with an England average of only 3%. So we're quite far down the league table in terms of the health of our water environment. But that provides us with an opportunity and a challenge to do things differently and do things better. And for a county that defines itself on an unspoilt rural character, I think we need to ask ourselves if this is something that we can really be proud of and that we're prepared to accept. So the issues beneath each watercourse that you can see on the map there show examples of why that particular stretch of river did not achieve good status. Those lists are by no means exhaustive, but show that actually there's no one culprit for the state that the rivers are in. Farming and agriculture, in my opinion, gets a bit of an unfair attack when it comes to looking at the state of the environment. We've actually got multiple factors, from the way that the water industry operates, and the way that watercourses have been modified for human infrastructure and urban development as well. But what we need to do now is acknowledge the mistakes of the past and work together to create something that's more sustainable for the future. Could I have the next slide, please, Lucy? So why is it important that river ecosystems are in a good state? Well, part of the reason for why they've got this poor bill of health across the county is that they've been tamed and straightened and dredged and disconnected from their surrounding landscapes. And this is by no means something that's happened recently. This has been a gradual process that started long before the Romans even arrived on our shores, but has rapidly intensified since the Industrial Revolution and the pursuit of greater agricultural productivity in the post-war period. So the result is that our rivers have been given a dramatically reduced space in which to function correctly. And instead of having a diverse assemblage of interconnected wet habitats in the bottoms of our valleys, water is actually confined to these artificially deep, dredged and straightened channels that are encouraged to get water to flow away as quickly as possible. And as climate change transforms this reliably damp climate that we've enjoyed and prospered from into one of more intensely wet and dry spells, it's going to be the water environment that takes the brunt of those challenges, both in conveying the torrential flows that we get in these deep Atlantic low pressure systems, but also in drying up during sort of prolonged periods of drought. So the solution is a simple one in theory, but a difficult one to enact in practice. And that is the reconnection of our rivers and streams with their natural floodplains. Now, to do this, what we need to do is reverse the period of dredging and straightening and deepening and encouraging of water to flow away as quickly as possible and get it to sit in the landscape and be stored, slow down its flow and passage through the landscape, recharge groundwater and create space for biodiversity to recover. With our partner organisations, we're cautiously optimistic that the changes in environmental subsidy schemes post-Brexit will deliver us with a raft of opportunities and incentives for farmers and land managers to allow for some of these things to happen and allow the recovery of the water environment on their land. We need to make space for water and get away from thinking that water is an inconvenience and see it as more of an asset. So when we think about what it means for us, the water environment needs to be in a healthy state to sustain us. Rutland Water, that big pond in the middle of the county that probably is the one thing that a lot of people outside of Rutland actually know about. The water in Rutland Water is mostly pumped out of the River Welland and out of the River Nene. And the flows in those rivers need to be sustainable and of good quality for that water to be able to be pumped up to Rutland and for it to then come out of our taps. Healthy river systems that are connected with their floodplains are really important for protecting downstream communities from flooding. So in a system where we've dredged and straightened our rivers to get the water flowing as quickly as possible, well, it may create a small improvement in that one place, but actually you've forced all the water downstream quickly and made it somebody else's problem. By reconnecting rivers with their floodplains, that water will slow down and be stored over a greater area in places where it's not going to damage communities and infrastructure. Buffering the effects of climate change on the landscape, a healthy river system with connected wetlands will actually slowly release water during times of drought. And we know that water really is the key to life. And where you find water, you find life. So having a greater connected network of freshwater environments will allow for wildlife to recover and move across the landscape. And that ties into the next point of having a recovery in biodiversity. Freshwater environments are particularly battered really on a regional, national and global state. Freshwater species have declined by 83% globally since 1970. And we think of ourselves as being a wet nation, but actually only 10% of our wetlands remain after being dredged out and drained. The most famous example, obviously, being the Fens, where only 0.1% of the original wetland area remains. We know that quality blue infrastructure is important for people's health and well-being. We all feel better being in nature, and having a look at those images on the right-hand side there of the slide shows what a healthy river environment could look like, with a diverse alluvial woodland, with connected wetland systems, versus something probably a bit closer to what they do look like, where the river is sort of disconnected from its floodplain. It has slumping banks, and we've unfortunately got livestock in this particular instance that are chewing the native wetland vegetation that's trying to come through. And finally, and I think this is one of the most compelling arguments for communities, is that actually the rivers and streams that cross our landscapes are really closely linked with our sense of local identity. And to give you a few examples, the names of the places that we know in Rutland uncover the wet history and wet past of our county. The Vale of Catmose, for example, that was dammed and flooded to create Rutland Water. Catmose, when you break it down, is a marsh frequented by wildcats. Moorcott, cottages beside the marsh. Ryle, river bend where rye grows. And Brook, you get no prizes for understanding where that comes from. But what can we do? Well, we're working with landowners and with communities across the natural catchment of the River Welland to identify opportunities to restore natural river ecosystems and engage those communities in taking ownership of those projects once they're completed. We have a popular citizen science scheme called River Wardens that equips and trains local volunteers to go out and monitor water quality, record incidences of flooding, and monitor wildlife populations as well. And we're really calling on everybody, both individual communities, local businesses, and local organisations to all work together to acknowledge the fact that the water environment is something that is precious, that is unique, and is in a bad state, but can recover rapidly if it's given the chance. So thank you for your time. I look forward to being in the one of the breakout rooms later and taking any questions that you might have for us then.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Chris. And again, I feel that we're sort of getting a sort of, spoilt for choice for things that we can do. And again, things that we can really make a difference on in Rutland, which is fantastic. Now we will be moving on to Laura Snorton and Lou Brooke. If I can press, my slideshow is now not moving on. Excellent. But I will announce it is Resource Futures, who are the great company that are helping Rutland County Council with how we are managing our waste and how we can make the most of that. I will just find your slides, Laura and Lou. I do apologise. Ah, there we go. I had a butterfinger, which is normally associated with cricket. There we go.
That's great. Thank you, Lucy. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to talk at this exciting climate conversation event today. As you said, I'm Laura Snorton. I'm one of the principal consultants at Resource Futures. And Resource Futures is an environmental consultancy largely based in Bristol. And we work with clients across the private, public and non-profit sectors to enable the positive management of material resources. And that involves gathering high quality evidence, providing expert analysis of data, and helping to facilitate engagement that achieves lasting behaviour change. So I've been invited to talk to you today about the waste composition analysis project that we undertook for Rutland County Council back in December 2020. And after I've done that, I'll hand over to my colleague Lou. And Lou is another principal consultant, but she leads the behaviour change team at Resource Futures. And Lou will talk through some of the examples of community-based action that we as a company are involved with. Next slide, please.
So I am just pressing an arrow key that's misbehaving.
No problem. That's great, thank you. So firstly, what is a waste composition analysis? Well, simply put, it's a process which involves going through residents' black bins and sorting through their waste into different categories. And this helps us understand what residents in Rutland are typically throwing away. It's the single most effective tool available to the council to evidence how effective the council's waste and recycling services are. And the results of the analysis is used to inform everything from a waste strategy to new waste and recycling services, through to bespoke communication, education and behaviour change campaigns. Every council in the UK undertakes these waste analyses, usually done once every few years. The results are then gathered nationally so that the councils can compare how well residents are using their waste and recycling services compared to the national picture. And in Rutland, the results of the waste composition analysis was impressive, as the infographic on the screen shows. only 12% of a typical black bin comprises waste which could have been recycled at the curbside. And comparatively, the national picture is 26.7% for the same range of recyclable materials. Of particular significance within the 12% figure, paper and cardboard material had the biggest improvement compared to the national results, with only 3.7% of recyclable material present in the black bin compared to 12.2% nationally. However, all the other materials that were there that could be recycled at the curbside were almost identical to national results. Plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays were virtually identical, with 3.3% present compared to 3.6% nationally. Glass was 1.6 compared to 2.6 nationally. Garden waste was 1.6 compared to 2.7% nationally. Tins, cans and aerosols were 1.4% compared to 2.7% nationally. And batteries was identical as the national figure, with 0.1% present. The infographic also shows that 41% of a typical bin in Rutland comprises food waste. And this is unsurprising because the council doesn't offer a food waste recycling collection service, but it's also typically higher than the national average of 27%, due to just over half of the councils in the UK offering that service. Quantities of textiles were analysed to inform future communication campaigns promoting the reuse and recycling of textiles, and disposable nappy quantities were similarly analysed to help inform possible future service decisions, such as encouraging and incentivising residents to use reusable nappies. And the results of these materials were again typical of the national picture, with both of them identical, textiles at 3% and disposable nappies at 4%. So the waste analysis showed us that overall, less than half, about 40%, of a typical bin in Rutland contains material which actually should have been thrown away in the black bin. And again, this is the same proportion as nationally. However, it's important to illustrate that the current recycling rate in Rutland is about 56%. And if residents recycled everything they could in the correct materials in the correct bins at the curbside, the recycling rate would be up in the high 60s, which would put you as the top performing authority in the UK. So the results show that if the council can further encourage and educate residents to reduce, reuse and recycle everything that they can correctly, then only half the capacity of the black bin is actually needed. And this evidence could be used to help the council redesign its curbside waste and recycling services to meet future needs and ensure that the council can realise service efficiencies, which helps to reduce costs while simultaneously increasing recycling rates. So if we could have the next slide, I'll now pass over to Lou for her presentation on examples of community action.
Yes, we're just coming.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Laura. I appreciate the introduction. As Laura said, I lead the behaviour change team, and my work spans behaviour change and circular economy. And naturally, obviously, we want to ensure that all the materials go through the right channels for recycling. But in an ideal world, we kind of want to intervene before then so that things aren't becoming waste. And one of the models we do that is through community action, which I believe all you guys are here for. Now, we pioneered a model in Oxfordshire called community action groups about 20 years ago now, and they have now developed into an independent entity, and we are replicating that model in different communities, one of which is Devon, and it's a project I run. May we just pop onto the next slide? So the principle of the community action groups model is that with dedicated support, communities and individuals who are keen to lead community action can actually be more effective. So we can help through one-to-one mentoring. We provide insurance such as public liability and product liability. We provide guidance on funding and support for risk assessments, which has gone through the roof, as you can imagine, in the last year. But our core purpose is really to help individuals and communities to get groups off the ground. And once they're off the ground, help them get established and work out how to develop a sustainable model to keep themselves going, and then to grow. And some of the things that are most valuable are things like skill shares. So we bring people together to share their skills and teach each other. Peer-to-peer networking. We provide how-to resources, so how to set up a food surplus cafe, how to set up a community fridge, for example, and training. And I'm really excited that in Devon, we've been running for, I think it's about 4 years, including 1 year of COVID, and we've now got 21 groups that we support, which is fantastic. So as you can see from this list here, they are quite a diverse bunch of groups. Our remit was initially in the area of waste prevention. Just framing this in carbon terms, we know that 45% of our carbon emissions are actually wrapped up in the products that we consume. So anything that we can do to give those products a longer life, to keep them in use, to reduce our dependency on buying new products is a good thing. So repair cafes is one of the things that's in the middle of the group here, is one of the things that we've been particularly successful. We have about 11 repair cafes in a small area, and they run in different ways. Some of them operate on a monthly basis, some of them on a weekly, kind of depends whether they have a permanent place or not. And during COVID, they at least a couple of our groups switched to click and collect, which is has been pretty popular and worked to fit in with the COVID rules and regulations. But they're wonderfully social events that bring lots of people together, and they do everything from repairing bikes to knife sharpening, fixing lamps, electricals, radios, furniture, sewing repairs, etc., etc. So they are particularly popular. And that is now, some of you may have heard of libraries of things. We don't have any libraries of things in our network at the moment, but it's something that we've been supporting them with training. And so that seems to be the next big popular type thing. But most recently, food, which we all know is also a huge area in terms of the climate. Community larders and fridges are very popular amongst our groups, and increasing too. And they, in some instances, it's as small as like a box, which in a community porch, up to like a large fridge or fridges in bus stations. And our models are quite diverse. So some of our groups source from local growers, others are tapped into local supermarkets or supplied by local community groups themselves, sharing their surplus food and products, and they range from larders with tins, etc., to fridges. But all sorts of activities going on, from beach cleans too, so just supporting the likes of the riverside. So we have dedicated groups that go out to clean rivers, clean beaches, clean the town. Apple days, making the most of the area's apples to and do community apple pressing and all things apple related, clothes swaps, etc., etc. So I think I will be in one of the breakout groups if anybody wants to hear more about some of the groups activities and things that people are doing. But that's just a flavour of the groups we've helped get off the ground and support on an ongoing basis.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. And yes, indeed, you will be in one of our breakout rooms. And again, I think the fact that there are so many things that we can do within our communities to make a big difference. Now, I'm very excited to introduce Ashley from the Rutland Youth Council, who have been leading a Taste It, Don't Waste It campaign, which links in very nicely to the waste analysis of 40% of our black bins being food. After Ashley has spoken, we will have a comfort break, you'll be pleased to hear, but I will now hand over to Ashley, fingers crossed.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm Ashley. I'm the Vice Chair of the Rutland Youth Council, and I've probably been in the Youth Council since October of 2017, so it's been quite a while. So obviously, as Lucy said, I'm going to speak to you about Taste It, Don't Waste It, which was our campaign for this year. So the Rutland, just to give a sort of insight, the Rutland Youth Council, we're a group of young people aged from 11 to 19, and we want to make sure that young people are getting a voice and having an influence on not only their local communities, but also national communities as well. So how our campaign started was Make Your Mark. We had a little survey that went out to schools, and the young people completed it. We got those results back, and our most pressing issue was protecting the environment. So then from that, we started to research the different elements of protecting the environment. As you can see, fast fashion, plastic pollution, and food waste. And whilst we were doing our research, we found out that over 6.6 million tons of food is wasted. So it's like 6.6 million tons of edible household food waste is being wasted in 2018, and we thought that this figure was way too high, and we needed to do something to try and lower this number. So we got a press conference as well, and our chair, I quote, she said, "Taste it, don't waste it" is relevant to everyone, and that small changes can have high rewards. So if we could have the next slide, please. If you want to, yeah, there we go. So our campaign was split into 5 different stages. For the first stage, we sent out a survey on SurveyMonkey. We decided to do it on SurveyMonkey because it was accessible for everyone, and it meant that we could get the results straight away. So then from our survey, we came up with some questions that we were going to ask in the family interviews, which was stage 2. So during stage 2, we had to do interviews for the families that volunteered for us, who wanted to see a decline in the amount of food that they wasted. This was particularly nerve-wracking for me because I was one of the first people to interview the families, and someone who I got stuck with, who I had to interview, was the Lord Lieutenant. So that was quite nerve-wracking for me because even though I've met her a couple of times, I still wanted to make a good impression on her about the Youth Council and make sure that she was interested in our campaign. So then from the interviews that we did, we were able to come up with an action plan for each of our families. So that took us on to stage 3. So the action plan, it was individual for each family, and it ran across 4 weeks, and each week the family would have something different to focus on. So for example, 1 week you could be focusing on doing more batch cooking, and the next week you could be focusing on making a menu one night and then sticking with that menu for the rest of the week so that you're not buying food that you don't need. So after the action plan, we then moved on to stage 4, which was the second lot of family interviews. And for this, we did it across Zoom along with the first interviews. And it was a catch up with the families, see how they were getting on with the action plan, whether it helped them reduce their food waste, and if it had made them think differently about the way that they were wasting food and how important it was and how it definitely impacted the environment. And then finally, it takes us to stage 5, which is the stage we're about to start. So we had to share a film. We're going to share a film of everything that the families have done and of our campaign. I'm not quite sure when it's coming out, but we are sorting the final preparations out. And we're also going to release a pledge. So for that, basically, it's just family saying, I'm going to batch cook more, and then they're going to try and keep that pledge for as long as they can. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So these were some of the statistics that we found out about food waste. So obviously, as you can see, 81% of the UK is worried about climate change. However, only 37% believe that food waste is actually a contributor to climate change and how it affects the world. The most disposed food in Rutland was fresh fruit and vegetables at 40%. So if we could move on to the next slide. So these are just a couple of thoughts to leave you with. So the carbon associated with food thrown away is the same amount as produced on our roads. And keep an eye out on our social medias, keep an eye out on Rutland County Council, and they'll have more information about our film and the pledge you can make.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was absolutely amazing. You are going to be joining one of our breakout rooms so you can share your top tips. And of course, when I share things from this, I'd be very grateful if I could have that link. And I know certainly we've maintained some of the good practice that the Rutland Youth Council shared with the Stevenson household. So thank you. Right, everybody, we're going to have a comfort break. We are running a little bit late, but I think if we could reconvene at 10:40, that should give everybody time to grab a coffee and a biscuit. So I'll see you all at 10:40. Thank you.